HTML5 output? Because you're starting with a clean slate. You're not starting with a bunch of mistakes. The problem with legacy projects is that you are starting with a bunch of mistakes, simply because there are things that people do and have done in legacy projects that we got with for years. The problem, and we still could, as long as we don't necessarily want to make those legacy projects responsive. But in a lot of cases, the information in a legacy project is still valuable, but we simply have to take that legacy project and extend it to new outputs or new targets. So that's what I want to talk about. So quick background, basically this is me. I've been doing this since 1979, which is kind of a frightening thought. Certified in Flare, RoboHelp, Mimic, VisiApps, which is actually a mobile app authoring tool, almost like Flare for apps. I've been certified in a number of tools over the years. I've been working in CSS since around 1999. It's getting a little vague. But basically, I've been doing this long enough to have made what I hope are at least the basic stupid mistakes. So what I also find when I've been giving this presentation for a couple of years, and I find that I get a lot of people in the presentation who've heard of responsive design, and they know that they're going to be doing it or that they should learn more about it, but they're not quite sure what it is. So what I'm doing in this presentation is breaking it into several parts. The first part is quite obviously what is responsive design and how does it work. The second part is what are the technical issues involved in bringing a legacy project up into compliance with clean code so that responsive design works. And the third part is how does this affect content and design. So what I'm going to do today, since we only have 2 half-hour sessions, and this is just about a 1-hour presentation, what I'm going to do today is go over the what is it and how does it work side and start touching on some of the technical issues. What we'll do at part 2 is finish the technical issues, go into the design and writing issues, and there's one neat little trick that I'll show you in part 2, which is how to use technology to control writing, which doesn't really tell you that much. So, in fact, what this is if you're developing material to be output on desktop and a tablet and a phone, in other words, a standard desktop and a mobile device, one of the problems that we have is that for the desktop, when you're writing instructions, you say click the key or click the button. But for mobile, we say tap. The problem is how do you do that? How do you handle that in responsive output when you only have one output? And I'll show you a trick that a friend of mine and I worked out where we can actually control the wording automatically through the style sheet.
Neil?
So that's just yes.
We have a question.
Sure.
And I don't know if you can answer it now or I can hold it till the end. The question is, our biggest problem is cleaning up legacy HTML documents, even for import into authoring tools or Bootstrap foundation frameworks. Is there an efficient way to do this?
Well, as a matter of fact, that's the core question in part 2. So I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for a minute, or for a few minutes, and I'll get into that. But I'll tell you that there is a lot going on. There's a lot involved there. That's much of what I'm going to talk about. And whether you're talking about taking legacy HTML or what's even more entertaining, legacy Word, there are some things that you know you have to change. But some of what you do there is sort of a voyage of discovery because every legacy project has different problems. Bear with me. We'll get to that. So, all right, what is responsive design? It's pretty simple. You're creating one website or help output that can detect the display device's properties and automatically reformat itself. So you guys can read as well as I can. So what it really means is this. Let's say that you're using Flare, RoboHelp, some tool, and you're generating the usual web help output or some sort of online output. And generally, we create that output for a desktop, big screen device. management comes along and says, hey, we want a second output tailored for tablets. No problem. Just create a second output. And okay, not a big deal. It's a little more work. But it's pretty easy, quick and easy to create a second output. And then management comes along and says, hey, we also want an output for phones, mobile phones, smartphones. Sure, no problem. Except you've now created 3 outputs, which means you have to create 3 outputs, maintain 3 outputs, distribute 3 outputs, and it's not that difficult, but the more outputs you have to handle, the more work it is, and the greater the risk of making a mistake somewhere. So responsive design really eliminates that problem. It's not perfect. It's got its own problems, but it does eliminate the need to create multiple outputs for multiple devices. What we're doing is creating one output that will automatically detect the size or other properties of the device on which it's being displayed and automatically reformat itself. It's one output. So, and as a credit line, the concept was developed by a guy named Ethan Marcotte in 2010, which is, it's 5 years. That's still fairly recent. And what I'd recommend is take a look at the article at this URL, because for the most part, when we work, we're working in sort of an environment that exists. In other words, we do XML. Well, we're doing it in the XML environment. But it's not that often that we can actually see a technology being born. And that's a case here. So I'd recommend reading this article. But here's an example. So here's the website for the Pittsburgh Children's Museum. This is the desktop output. And you notice it's got a menu horizontally across the top. It's got a bunch of pictures. And what you're seeing is the big screen desktop output design. So here's the exact same output, but tabletized, so to speak. And you'll notice that what's happened is that a lot of the horizontal menu is gone. In fact, about half of it's gone. And I don't know if you can see, but on the horizontal menu, the second one from the right says More. And there's a little icon with 3 horizontal lines. Officially, it's referred to as the flyout. Unofficially, it's sometimes referred to as the hamburger. But if you click that, what that will do is open up almost like a drop-down submenu that lists all those menu items that we don't see. In other words, part of the menu has been subsumed into the hamburger. So that's the tablet output. Here's the phone output. And you notice what they did. They still kept the cool picture, although the whole thing has been heavily reformatted. A lot of those smaller images that you see at the bottom are still there, but you notice you now have to scroll. But what they've done as far as the menu is concerned is really boil it down to 2 things. Call us and find us, which you might translate as, we want to make it easy for you to give us your money. And again, this is one output. It looks like 3 separate outputs, but it's one. And it's automatically reformatting itself, changing itself around, depending on the properties of the device on which it's displayed. Here's another example for help. So here's a flare output. This is just some topic that I threw together. And again, this is desktop output. It's got a table of contents and an index over on the left. There's a topic over on the right with a graphic image. And if you look at the upper left corner, there's a little blue hyperword logo. So again, this is desktop. Here's tablet. And you notice it's sort of the same thing, except that, number one, all the navigation options, the left-hand nav pane is gone. But if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's that little flyout. There's the little hamburger again in the middle of those 3 icons. And now centered is the hyperword logo. And again, if I do this, here it is on the phone. And again, pretty much the same, except more of the options, more of the navigation icons are gone. And just to show that something changed, I added these yellow overline and underline bars. to the hyperword logo. But again, this is one output that's automatically reformatting itself. And since I'm certified in both Flare and RoboHelp, I'm honor-bound to show a RoboHelp example. So here it is, again, desktop. Here it is on tablet. And you notice, again, the effect. Navigation pane on the left in the desktop output is gone. It's been replaced by that vertical strip over on the right in the tablet. And here it is in smartphone. And again, that navigation strip has now been thrown down to the bottom, smaller icons. And the idea, again, is to try to automatically reformat the stuff based on the properties of the device in which it's being displayed. So it's cool, but why does this matter to us? Well, biggest thing is right here. It lets us, technical communicators, create content that will run on any device that readers may have within reason. And I say that because within reason, because there's so many devices coming along, and there's so many devices for which I expect to be doing content over the next 2, 3, 4 years, that I won't say that responsive design is the answer to everything. But for what we have today, desktops, tablets of various sizes, and phones, responsive design will do it. Whether responsive design would work for something like the Oculus Rift, I don't know yet, or the iWatch, I don't know yet. I haven't run into anybody who needs to create documentation that might run on devices like that, but I expect to. So, and in my opinion, this is the biggest change in TechCom since February of '97, when Microsoft changed the code basis of online help from the old RTF format to HTML. But, there's always a but, converting legacy projects can be messy, which is putting it mildly. To the person who asked about what you have to worry about in converting legacy projects, well, this sums up pretty much my answer. It's a mess. And it can raise new issues, as you'll see. All right, so just check the chat pod and ask, does anybody have any questions so far? This summed it up real fast. Does anybody have any questions?
There's no outstanding questions right now.
All right, very good. Good.
They'll be
All
coming.
Right, okay, let's look at how it works. So there's really 3 things at the bottom here, and they're really all CSS based. First thing is we need to go from the standard points when we're setting up size units for things like fonts. We need to go from points to what are called relative size units. And points are familiar, 72 points to an inch. Everybody knows them. Everybody understands them. If you come out of a Word environment, out of a FrameMaker environment, any kind of print, hard copy environment, you know points. The problem is points are not the best idea when you're going online for several reasons. One is that points cannot be, you, the user, cannot resize points in many cases. And browsers themselves cannot resize points in many cases. If you've ever been to a website in Internet Explorer, and you decide the text is too small, so you try to enlarge it, and nothing happens. In other words, you can't resize the text. There's a good chance that text was sized in points. So what you want to do is look at getting into what are called, relative size units. Several different ones, but probably the most commonly used ones are these 3. One of them is the percent, then there's the M, and then there's an emerging one called rem. So in a nutshell, using percents says that every browser has some built-in fonts and font settings. So with normal being defined as 100%, but the thing is what 100% equals is going to differ depending on the browser. So for in Windows, for example, normal 100% equates to about 10 points. In Safari, because Mac screen technology is different, normal equates to 100%, equates to about 12 points. So that's great, because if you say make normal not 10 points or 12 points, but 100%, the browser then does your sizing automatically for you. The MEM is, this description is no longer quite accurate, but it's a lot more understandable than the official description. It's equivalent to the height of the letter M in each browser's font set. This is no longer entirely the case, that this is now actually computed by the browser depending on the style. But if you assume that an M in EM is equivalent to the height of the letter M, then what that tells you, again, is that if you say normal is 1M, normal will be equivalent to the size of the letter M on whatever browser you're using. There's some problems here involving compounding, for which there's a new relative size unit called the rem, or root M. And what that does is, as I say at the bottom, it sets the M size relative to the font size of the root element HTML. And if anybody's wondering, do tech writers really speak this way, or are we turning into programmers? And the answer is yes, to both. I don't have time to go into the details about rem here, but I do have this reference at the bottom, which I think was quite well done, and I'd recommend reading it. So why go relative? Well, if you look at this image, this is my old Chief of Barbecue, and I'm displaying this on a smartphone, but the picture was too wide. So the picture has, or the topic has, a vertical scroll bar and a horizontal scroll bar. Now, there isn't necessarily anything wrong with horizontal scroll bars, although they're usually presented as the work of the devil. But you generally don't want horizontal and vertical scrolling together. It's difficult. It's like reading a billboard through a paper towel roller. If I set the width to relative, in this case, I set the width to 50% rather than, I think it was 450 pixels. But if I set the width to 50%, this means that the browser will always show the image at 50% of whatever space is available. In other words, the size is relative to the amount of space. And the beauty of this is that each browser is handling the formatting of the image for you. So this is a huge help. Second thing is what's called media queries. And this is what actually controls how the screens reformat themselves as we go to different devices. So, and this is done, again, through the CSS. What happens is, by using these queries, we can say that the screen should look like thus and such or the layout should look like thus and such until the screen is smaller than, let's say, 1200 pixels. At 1200 pixels, the screen layout should change to X. And it should look like X until the screen is narrower than, let's say, 480 pixels, at which point the screen layout should change to something else. And those change points, based on the width, are referred to as breakpoints. They're the points at which you tell the CSS, reformat my material. And generally, everybody including me, talks about this being based on device screen size, but there's a bunch of other testable parameters as well, such as device resolution, device orientation, color versus monochrome. Is this even a device? Do not try to define device-specific breakpoints. There's too many things to keep track of. I'm hoping nobody here works for Samsung in case I tell Samsung jokes, but Samsung is notorious for releasing different tablets at different sizes. In effect, Samsung has been described as throwing different sized tablets at the market to see what sticks. And if you try to define a different breakpoint for each Samsung device, you'll go crazy. You just can't keep up with it. So what you do is you set sort of a generic tablet breakpoint, and it's sort of a generic phone breakpoint. And you accept that, okay, this is going to work on iPads, and Samsung tablets, and it won't be totally optimized for each one, but it will be optimized for this generic tablet or this generic phone. Here's some examples of a media query. At media is the main control, and then screen, is this a screen? And the first one says, is it wider than 320 pixels? The second one also says, is this a screen? And does the screen's width exceed 800 pixels? So for the first one you might use for, say, a smartphone. The second one you might use, say, for a tablet. And as I say, at each breakpoint, there are different settings in the CSS that will take effect. And you can reformat the screen, hide different elements, show different elements, and so on. And finally, fluid grids. So you might have a layout that is a nice standard horizontal layout. If you've ever had to insert, say, 3 graphics in a topic, you wanted those graphics aligned horizontally. So, in fact, what a lot of people do is cheat, so to speak. And you create a table, hide the table borders, make them transparent, and then you insert the graphics in each one of the 3 table cells in the first row, let's say. And your graphics are nicely aligned. But the problem is that when the user displays your output on a narrower screen device, like a tablet or a phone, because the images are in a table, they can't reformat themselves, and you wind up with a horizontal scroll bar. What we want is a way to set up a layout that can go from horizontal to vertical automatically. And we do this using the float property in the CSS. Don't use hidden tables. And there's a good intro at this URL that I have here, good intro of what fluid grids are. If any of you are STC members, earlier this year, I don't remember exactly when, but I wrote a column for Intercom. I've been writing a column since, I think, 2000 or 2001. I just ended it with the last column that I wrote. But one of the columns that I wrote was about the CSS float property as a technical issue and also as a philosophical issue in what that illustrated about changes in technical communication. And I show examples, including the code. If anybody's interested, shoot me an email, and I would be happy to send you a copy of the article. So, we have about 5 minutes. So what I want to do is pile into this, get about 5 or 6 slides through this, and then we'll stop and pick up again for part 2. Legacy technical issues. Biggest issue is local formatting. And this is the biggest issue whether you're talking about legacy HTML files or legacy Word files. And I'm sure you guys all know what local formatting is. And by the way, when I say you guys, that's the New England expression for all you people in the room. A lot of people will do this, where you see P class equals this, style equals that, etc., etc. And people will do this in HTML, legacy files, or they'll do it in Word. And all that local or inline formatting then gets translated to basically garbage code when you bring it into HTML. What you want to do is override it or get rid of it and replace it with something that is good syntax compliant and B, simple, because it's inefficient. It will also override the styles in your style sheet. If you've ever applied a style to material that was created to legacy material, only to find out that one of your styles just doesn't work for some strange reason. The reason invariably is that there's local formatting in the document that's blocking that style, because local formatting always takes precedence over a style sheet. And actually, I can qualify almost anything I say, and I'll qualify what I just said. Local formatting always takes precedence over the formatting in the style sheet. There is a workaround for that. That's actually part of the CSS standard. It's called the important the exclamation point important property, and it works fine, but it can be a risky thing to do in terms of project management. But basically, local formatting is bad coding. And what you need to do is go through the document and replace old local formatting code with styles. And you can do this. You can do this through the GUI. And if you don't know code, I would say do this through the GUI. But that is a tough way to work, and because it's slow. I'm a big believer in, if you know code, going directly into the code and cleaning up getting rid of the local formatting by doing massive search and replace. And you'll be doing that in the code itself. And what I tend to do, and I've got about 1 minute, so I'm going to sum it up on this slide. What I tend to do is open topic number 1, start looking at the topic, looking for something that looks weird. And when I find it, I'll go into the code, see what weird code is driving that weird thing, and then do a global search and replace on the ground to replace that weird, bad local code with proper styles, on the grounds that if my client did that once, they've probably done it twice or several thousand times. And I'm just going to clean it up globally. I'm going to replace it. My experience is that working that way, doing global search and replaces, when I've gone through 20% of the topics, I've replaced 80% of the problems. But there's still the other 80% of the topics to grind through. It may also mean cleaning up the CSS, because you may have had a client who created a CSS, but maybe wasn't sure what they were doing, and you may have to clean it up. Also switch from points to a relative size unit. Do that as part of the CSS. So I'm showing that we are at 12:31 Eastern Time, and we are just about halfway through, which is right where I want it to be. So let me ask now, does anybody have any questions? Is this making sense? And does anybody have any questions from the background material that I've covered so far?
All right. Well, we have one question. Question observation says, some sites insist on mobile presentation when accessed via laptop display plus real, in quotes, browser. Alternatives to using size alone to determine user agent and preferring viewing mode? That's the question. Mobile presentation can be annoying when viewed in a browser on a laptop.
Yeah, agreed. And probably the answer there is to talk to the client to find out if they're devoted to a mobile presentation, or if they're willing to take some other approach. There's been some discussion over the last year or so about whether a mobile presentation is actually a better approach than responsive design. Because there were, very specifically, Adobe raised some concerns about that on the grounds that it can take about up to two and a half times as long for a responsive page to display as opposed to a mobile specific page. And they have some statistics for that. If anybody's interested in those, again, shoot me an email. I'll send you the reference that Adobe provided. Since then, I've heard other people say, no, this is not a problem, simply because as networks are getting faster and code is becoming more optimized. So I'll leave it to you to decide who said that, but I would be happy to send you the URL.
I love that. Because as fast as our computers are now, I was just thinking about this week. Now it still feels slow. It's an old computer. It feels slow, but I remember the old ones. This is not slow.
No, this is indeed not slow, but actually, at the risk of going into the when I was your age sagas, but I had the original PC. In fact, I had some things that were pre-PC, and all they were driving was white letters on a green screen.
Oh yeah.
They weren't driving all this pretty GUI stuff. And there are times when I think that my old PC from whenever it was, it sometimes feels faster, or at least in memory.
Good God.
This wicked cool thing that I'm running now. But yeah, in general, you assume that things are getting faster. And what was a problem a year ago may not be a problem now.
Right. All right, so we have one other comment. Nice introduction and overview. Looking forward to part 2.
Very good.
Awesome. All right, so type in your questions if you've got a couple of more. And before we go, I will pop up and show you what's coming up. Our next master session is tomorrow. This is an experiment we started a year ago. It was kind of fun, actually. I was having sequential conversations with multiple customers and wishing they were in the same room talking to each other. So that's what we did. We started a mastermind group where they could come together and discuss things. And tomorrow's topic is data eval and content profiling. They're bringing their use cases to discuss. It is not free because it is personal and real and serious conversation between the participants, and you don't want people just dropping in and out and getting your information. So there's a small fee, but it's less than your cable bill. And don't forget, next month, Neil will be back, part 2, picking up where we left off today. So be sure and sign up. How do you do that if you haven't already? Be sure to go to tcdojo.org and sign up right there on the page. It's at the bottom. Okay, do we have any more questions? I have a couple while they're still typing, if anyone is. I saw the slide on horizontal scroll bars. You don't really see that as much anymore because it's the zoom in, zoom out, right, on mobiles and tablets. Right. Do you really see scroll bars horizontal?
Well, okay, I'm a consultant, so I'll give you my usual weasel answer, which is it depends. Here's what I'd say. I do a lot of online help, obviously, but I also do apps. And if I'm doing something that's an app, no, it's rare that I'm going to see horizontal scrolling. I do see it, but it's rare. But if I'm doing online help that's been mobilized, so to speak, and if the online help was initially designed for like legacy help projects, for big screens, then yeah, it's quite common because you have excessively wide tables, excessively wide graphics, and no matter how you hold the device, you're going to scroll. So yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
That's one of the reasons that I say go relative sizes.
All right, here's a good question. How do you handle tables in responsive design, especially for mobile display?
Okay, how do you handle tables? Again, assume that my answer to any question is it depends. But here, slightly more useful. A couple of things you want to do. Number one is if you create a table, do not use fixed table sizes. Don't use fixed column widths, for example. What you want to do is use the auto-fit feature and set it to auto-fit to a window. It's probably your best bet because that way, as the window size shrinks, the table width, the individual column widths will shrink down as well. And they'll shrink down to the minimum, which is usually the length of the longest word in each column. At which point they're not all that useful, but they do shrink down. The problem when you do that is as they shrink down, what might have been a very short table cell suddenly becomes 6 feet long because it's so narrow. So the first thing I would say is, again, set your tables, and I'll actually talk about this in part 2, but just to jump ahead now since somebody asked the question, set your table widths to auto-fit to screen. Number one, make sure you're using relative font sizing for the table text, and those two are the easy answers. The messy answer is, I would say, rethink and possibly redesign your table. Because do you need that complex a table? If you have merged cells, embedded tables, and so on and so forth,
right?
Complex table. And if you do need, you may not need that complex a table. You may be able to simplify it, or possibly even get rid of a table, because tables, to a degree, have always been something of a crutch. But the other thing is, if you really need that much information complexity, what you may want to do is actually rethink how users get the information that you're currently presenting in a table. In other words, a table is static presentation of information, but what you might want to do is rethink it so that a user can do a search and get, it's almost like doing a focused search to one cell of a table or one row of a table or one piece of information in a table. And this is not going to be easy because this is going to force us to rethink how we present information from a static table to a dynamic search. All right, I've heard this idea suggested by in a number of places. I've suggested it. I understand what I mean in theory, but actually making this happen in practice is not going to be easy. So because it's going to change how we think. So the simple answer is making tables relative. The more messy answer is rethink what a table is and how it's used to present information.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
if the person who asked that question is thinking, well, he didn't really answer it, you're right. Because, to be honest, because this is one of these emerging areas. Just like 25 years ago, there were questions about how do we move hard copy material into online. And those of us who were around back then remember a lot of the struggles and the gyrations that we went through trying to figure out how to make this work, which nowadays is taken for granted. And we're going to go through the same thing with tables.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd heard the thing, too, about not using points. I've even heard don't use pixels, really, because that's not necessarily... Yep. It's the same problem in a different name, basically.
Yes, exactly. You want to try to avoid using pixels. You want to try to have everything relative.
Excellent.
All right.
All right.
Is there another question?
I see many thank yous for you.
All right.
Oh, one more. Here we got one last one. How do you handle large code samples in responsive design? That's a good one.
Okay, I'm going to have to find the person who asked that question. How do you handle large code samples? Like I said earlier, I can qualify almost anything I say. So when I said don't use horizontal scrolling, I'll stick to that. But there may be times when you have to. And I would say a large code sample might be a case where you just have to have horizontal scrolling. It could be presented as an image where you just have to have horizontal scrolling. And in fact, horizontal scrolling might be a good idea there because the alternative might be to present that large code sample actually in text form and have it dynamically wrap as the screen size changes. But I wouldn't want to do that with a code sample because if you get dynamic wrapping on the lines of a code sample, it's going to be confusing to the users as to where is a line. So that's one case where, as much as I hate saying it, I might put up with, in fact, I might even encourage the use of horizontal scrolling. All right, one of the things that people have suggested is pinch and zoom, which will work. But even if you pinch and zoom in that case, you're still going to have to scroll.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
I've been seeing a pattern, like an information pattern, show up with regard to that stuff more and more frequently, where they've got the code sample in like a little box, and it has the scroll for sure. But there's usually a copy button so that somebody can pull it out and look at it in their own text editor, right, or wherever.
Yes, very true. Excellent point. And without going too far down this road, what I'll say is that what you just described is starting to move into the gray area between pure, simple online help that's been moved onto a mobile device and call it more dynamic online help, and even moving into the gray area between dynamic online help and mobile apps, because it is eminently possible to create a mobile help in the form of a mobile app now. But in order to get it to be able to do some of these cool things, we're going to have to start learning new languages like JavaScript to start with.
Right.
So if you don't know JavaScript, I would learn it. It's not that difficult. It looks like gibberish, like as does any language. But it's not that difficult, and a lot of the cool things that we're going to want to do in mobile environments are going to call for Java help. I'm not sorry, not Java help, JavaScript.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's the
Yeah.
one language I think everybody should know at this point or should be learning for sure. It's the most helpful,
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, so Patricia says, it's me, Patricia. She's the one asking all the hard questions. I assume you know
Okay.
Patricia. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. We've run a little long. We've got part 2 next month, so be sure and come back. And this will go up onto YouTube today or tomorrow. So if you missed anything or want to review it, I started the recording a little bit late, but you know, all the good stuff is here. It starts with Neil talking about himself. So how is that not perfect?
Aw.
All right, folks. Thanks for
All right.
coming. And Neil, thank you so much for doing this and coming back next month.
My pleasure. Thank you all. Have a very nice Thanksgiving, and I'll see you in a month.
You guys too. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.